You love me, Irena.
Mm-hmm.
You know I love you, don't you? I've never kissed you. Do you know that's funny?
Why?
Well, when people in America are in love, or even think they're in love, they've usually kissed long ago. Well? Irena, what's wrong?
I've lived in dread of this moment. I've never wanted to love you. I've stayed away from people. I lived alone. I never wanted this to happen.
But you just told me you love me.
I do. I do. I fled from the past. Some things you could never know or understand. Evil things. Evil.
Irena, you've told me something of the past. About King John and the witches in the village and the cat people descended from them. They're fairy tales, Irena. Fairy tales heard in your childhood. Nothing more than that. They've nothing to do with you, really. You're Irena. You're here in America. You're so normal, you're even in love with me, Oliver Reed, a good plain Americano. You're so normal, you're going to marry me. And those fairy tales, you can tell them to our children. They'll love them.
You've landed on Substance, a podcast aimed at being biblical, thoughtful, and human. Join us here every other week as we engage the culture without the culture war. I'm your host, Philip Marinello, saying happy spooky season. Excited to have you guys with us here today. We're doing our spooky season substantive cinema. Very excited, and this really kind of goes in with our previous episode with Josh Larson. We briefly mentioned cat people on that last episode. He covers the film in his book Fear Not in his Sex and Death chapter, and when I watched the movie for preparing for that previous episode, I'm like, this is a great movie. This will make an excellent episode. So here we are. If you are new to the show, we want to welcome you. The Substance is a Christian variety show where every other week we invite thoughtful, interesting, talented people to the show, and we talk about things related to faith, culture, and the arts. Previous guests include Tim Whitaker of the New Evangelicals, John Harris from The Bodies Behind the Bus, artist Rommel Ruiz, Josh Larson from Film Spotting, we mentioned him, and Jamar Tisby. So a whole wide variety of folks and with different disciplines and focuses and different talents and different areas that they are working in, things like that. So got a long library, 130 some episodes. Go check some of those out. Listen, rate, review, share, all that good stuff. But today we've got artist Stephanie Stalvey. I'm super excited to share this episode with you guys. She is somebody who has been on my radar for the last few months here. I've seen a number of people interact with and share her stuff. So as I was looking at her feed not too long ago, I noticed one of her short webcomics actually very much resembles cat people in its essence. So I thought, hey, I'll shoot her DM, say, hey, if you're interested, love to join us. And she responded almost immediately. And this was a great conversation. This one's a little bit long, so won't take too much time here. I'll just say that we're covering cat people. It's an older movie, but it is currently streaming on Max. So if you have that, you can watch it there. It's like 70 minutes, or get it from your library. There's a great Criterion DVD or Blu-ray. So there's that as well. But yeah, without further ado, here is my conversation with Stephanie on 1942's Cat People. Stephanie Stalvey, welcome to The Substance.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I'm really excited to have you on. You've been somebody who has been on my radar probably for like, I don't know, the last 6 to 12 months. I've seen a lot of people sharing your post. At some point here, I've been going back with him for months and months. I think maybe Josh Nadeau from Sword and Pencil, I saw share some of your stuff. I know my wife follows you, and a lot of the folks in the deconstructing communities I'm in follow and share you. And your book Pure, I know it's kind of like hitting a nerve, and like it's just touching the experience of a lot of people. But I've seen a lot of the women who I know very much appreciate and resonate, and kind of using it as catharsis or lament. But have appreciated it. And when I saw one of your stories, I was like, oh, that's very Cat People-esque. I think she'd be great. After this movie was in my head, after we had on Josh Larson from Think Christian and Film Spotting recently, I was like, all right, I think I'm going to do Cat People this year. And then it came back up on my feed, and I was like, oh, I'm going to reach out to her and just see what she thinks. And it turns out that you're a big movie fan.
Oh, absolutely. I had never seen Cat People, but I watched it twice after you messaged me, and I'm obsessed with this movie. I cannot wait to talk about it. It's so great.
I guess briefly, for me and for the audience, a lot of people know you as an artist and a writer, somebody who creates. Tell us about your history with movies, horror movies. Like where are you? Where were you, and where are you kind of with this sort of fare? Oh yeah,
no, I love stories and narrative, obviously. Like, and movies and books are always like have been a big thing that me and my husband have enjoyed together. And we like spooky season.
Yes.
He's like a huge reader. He has like his ritual books that he'll reread every October. He always does like The Shining and Frankenstein, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I usually go for some like Ira Levin. I do Rosemary's Baby, which there's some like Rosemary's Baby kind of vibes here too, as far as
a little bit.
Lorraine's like gaslit the whole time, you know.
Except it turns out to be real, but it kind of.
Well, that's what I mean. She's telling the truth the whole time. So I like these stories that can kind of get to deep psychological themes, you know. And I think this one particularly, I think is just so beautiful how it's like engaging with these psychological ideas of like the shadow and femininity and feminine erotic power and our collective conscious unfear of it at like in 1942.
1942.
So when I was watching, I was trying to place myself in history here too, because like psychology and psychiatry is like a major theme.
It is
in this.
Very progressive and groundbreaking.
This is the bleeding edge of like this existing in the world. Like,
yeah, it had been around for like 15 years in the mainstream.
Yeah, like barely. Like Freud died like 2 or 3 years before this movie was made, right? Mm-hmm. So Carl Jung would have still been alive and working, but like his major works like weren't published yet. Like I don't think Ban and His Sibyls, or it was really interesting to see like artists kind of processing these super new ideas in real time, kind of, you know, like I wonder like how were people thinking about things at this point? Super interesting.
So yeah, I'm going to get into that here in just a moment. But yeah, as I was thinking about it, I was like, themes, you got like religious fundamentalism, you've got the fear of feminine sexuality and repression, the false dichotomy of like normal and abnormal, and all of these things. I was like, if she says yes, this will be like, I love having like a pairing of guest and topic. And a lot of times like we'll have people on the Substance who they write a book about a particular area of justice or theology or culture. And then we'll obviously talk about that. But I was like, this is like the work you do and are passionate about and are known for. And like I'm so glad that I could introduce you to this. And spoiler alert, we're going to be covering this in depth. This movie came out in 1942. And as we mentioned, a beautiful and brisk runtime of 73 minutes. Man, I love a 90-minute movie. I got amped when I saw the runtime for this. So this was directed by Jacques Tourneur. It was the first movie of this sort produced by RKO. Basically, like, they used to fill out, when people went to the movies, they would see a couple of different things, and a lot of time, like, that's where B movie came from. Like, there would be like the main thing, like the epic or the romance or the comedy, and then the B movie, which is usually like sci-fi genre, made like light exploitation, something like lighter that for the kids or to kind of balance out the other stuff. So, but this was actually, it ended up being so popular that it became the A feature in a lot of places and was the OG independent horror film. This was made for about $130,000 at the time and made them about $4 million. This was the original independent horror movie that made a ton of money, like Blair Witch or Evil Dead or Paranormal Activity, all these things where they're like, they make them on nothing, but there is passion, there is care, they get the right people in front of and behind the camera, and there's just kind of magic, and it blows up. So I'm excited that I got to introduce you and everybody who's listening. This genuinely, when I watched this, I was like, this is incredible. I watched a lot of really good old horror movies from the 30s and 40s. I was like, this is very special. And I mean, I've only recently in the last 4 or 5 years really dove deep on horror, but this is a strong contender for like a top 10 for me. I really love this movie.
Yeah, Philip, I love it too. Okay, do we want to like kind of tell people what it's about?
So this is jumping off points. So Serbian fashion designer Irina Dubrovna, an American marine engineer, a guy who creates ships. Thought that was an interesting profession. Oliver Reed, they meet in Central Park, fall in love, marry after a brief courtship, but Irina will not consummate the union for fear she will turn into a panther compelled to kill her lover because of a belief harbored by her home village. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. And I love, like we mentioned, because it's a brief runtime, I love that they just like get to it. Scene, thing. But it didn't feel like super expositionally. Like the scenes just moved efficiently. It never felt like they were rushing or dumping exposition. It just felt like there was no fat. I mean, it could have definitely maybe been longer, but there was just no fat on this movie. Every scene had a purpose. It pushed it forward or made a point. Like it added to the puzzle.
Yes. Oh, it was gorgeous.
So it opens up with a woman working on some art at Central Park Zoo.
Yeah, I thought that her like meet cute with Oliver was so cute. He's like gently teasing her about littering, like pointing to the sign. Oliver's a saint, isn't he? Like I can't blame Oliver in this whole movie.
It was really interesting the way it was done, because I feel like a lot of the either stereotypical or things that you would think happen in this movie don't. Like every time, don't get too far ahead, but like eventually, like there is another woman, there's a complication. But like you mentioned, I feel like every time he gets a chance to like do the typical dumb guy thing in a movie, there's like a thoughtful, like reasoned, like caring in a lot of ways.
He's like, he's genuinely like really sweet and receptive to her. Like, and, oh my gosh, his little transatlantic accent. He's like, I'll give you all the patience and understanding in my heart.
Yeah, they do occasionally drop deeply into the 30s and 40s talk. But it is also like, it didn't feel like an old movie to me. What did you think?
Yeah. No, same. It felt, I mean, I think I'm also used to like watching some old movies, but it just felt really human. I think that you don't think about that I'm watching an old movie when you're watching something that's like really human. Yeah. I think that like Oliver is like a genuinely good guy who just didn't know what he was in for. And I think that that's another, like, you know, I think when he brings home the kitten, it's kind of like, this is what he's almost like expecting.
It's normal,
marriage and a wife. Right. I'm going to have this, you know, pet, kind of like a sweet, cute, normal, domesticated pussycat. And she's like, if I get in touch with this part of myself that is erotic, it is not a pussycat. It is enormous. And it's like, it's more than you can handle. And it's more than she thinks she can handle.
Yeah. She's terrified.
She's terrified of it. Yeah.
Well, and so at the beginning of the movie, I thought it was like, the more I think about it, I'm like, this is a really rich movie that I feel like I'm probably going to be enjoying regularly for the rest of my life and introducing as many people to it as I can. So right away at the beginning, she's drawing at the zoo. She kind of like is a little ashamed. And at first you kind of think, oh, it's like an artist being like insecure or whatever. He doesn't even say like, hey, can I walk you home? Like he just picks up her art supplies and is like, well, we're together now. We flirted for 30 seconds.
She's like, come up for tea. Absolutely.
And then she's like, you want to come in for tea? You're my first friend that I've made. And I'm like, wow, that was all you have to do is be like a handsome guy that's well-dressed and drinking a soda pop, and you can just walk up to anybody.
Yeah, he had the right vibes. No, I also love the that there's just like constant, really it's almost like on the nose, but it's so beautiful, like metaphoric imagery, and the entire thing, like the thing that she's drawing in the intro in the Central Park Zoo is this captive panther that's in a cage and it's pacing, and it's kind of like, you can tell that it has this like pent up energy and rage that's being contained. And she's doing these sketches of it, maybe Freudian sword piercing through it. I feel like
it's both Freudian and foreshadowing.
Oh yeah, it's definitely both of those things. And I wouldn't usually be like, oh, that's Freudian, but this is like overtly, I think, trying to reference Freud. I think that it's not super friendly towards psychology, because the psychiatrist guy he's sort of like a villain.
He does end up being a bit of a creep at the end. He is genuinely trying to be helpful, but he seems to be genuinely trying to be helpful. But then at the end, which is super interesting. Let's get to that. Like the more that I think about the finale, when I first saw it, I was like, oh, like I didn't even think about kind of the steps it took. And I'm like, man, this is. I thought it was brilliant. Like the more I think about it, the more impressed I am, especially that they did that all in like 70 minutes.
Oh, 100%.
But there's a lot of sword imagery, and there's a sword in the finale as well. But I think the cat getting penetrated is definitely not subtle.
No, and I mean, she's inviting him back into this like warm, sacred space that smells like a living thing. And she's like, nobody has ever been here before. You are unique and this is special. But I think it's at the first point that they're together, like when they're having tea, that she tells him they see the statue of King George.
Yep.
Right. So she kind of tells about this legend, some like obscure piece of Serbian history that I'm not super familiar with, like a Byzantine king. But
I don't know if it was real or not. But it was similar to the drawing. There's a statue.
I think he's real.
It could be.
Yeah.
There's a statue of a man on a horse with a sword with a panther impaled on it.
Yeah. And she says the panther is a metaphor for the kind of wicked, evil people in the ways that the people of her village had fallen into. And then she kind of describes how, was it Mamelukes or something, like invaded her village, took people as slaves. And then she said the majority of them worshipped God in a true Christian way.
Yep.
But there were some of that, like, right. So it's just like very kind of colonialist, imperialist idea. She said some of them were evil, and they were witches, and they said their masses to Satan. And she goes, King John put most of them to the sword, but some of them escaped into the mountains, the wisest and the wickedest. And these are the like ancestral people that the women specifically who, according to her legends, become panthers and cats when they are like filled with any kind of like strong emotion, rage, jealousy, passion, or like sexual arousal.
Yeah, this is 1940. Like, this is the 40s, and they didn't come out and frankly discuss sex, but this was. I listened to some of the commentary tracks. This was kind of like farther than anybody else had gone. Like, they directly tie sex and sexuality to her troubles, to her eventual transformation at the end. And that kind of had never really been done before. And with her whole like marital issues, like not consummating, like the plot point of the difficulty in consummating a relationship, that had never been done in a studio film before. Yeah. Like, this is breaking a lot of ground. And I feel like it kind of got to do that. You're a comic person. I'm a big comic person. Like, and we've talked about this on the show many times with like Us and Get Out and Night of the Living Dead, how genre movies, whether it's horror or crime, sci-fi, dystopia, whatever, like, you can get at these things very incisively, but also in ways like, it's almost like Jesus talked about, like, for the people, like, covering people's eyes who don't need it, but like for the people who can see, like, you are really like getting at the heart of a lot of very true things. So the movie directly is, if you kind of have eyes to see, this movie is directly dealing with fundamentalist sexual repression. Yeah.
And the kind of deep collective unconscious fear and terror that we have around women's sexuality, and how powerful that is, and how terrifying that power, how threatening that power is to our idea of like normalcy and modernity and in a patriarchal society, and how women learn to become terrified of this part of them, and actively repress it to the point where they don't have access to an essential part of their being. And I think that's where it feels like there's a lot of, overlap with my own work is, kind of like the embodied and psychological effects of coming to believe that there is something in your nature that is depraved and wicked and bad and threatening, and that if it gets out, and it will destroy you and your life and everyone around you. And kind of necessarily, if that's what you think, that this is something that is just some part of your flesh that you cannot be curious about, that you cannot listen to. It's just bad. The only option that you have is to like judge it and try to quiet it and try to keep it down, and to like feel guilty enough or repentant enough about it. And then there's where I think that psychologically, like Carl Jung would say, you're forcing that thing into the shadow. When we are judgmental rather than curious about the shadow, that's when it does kind of become more warped and potentially dangerous, right?
Yeah. I mean, there's a moment where Irina and Oliver are in her apartment, and the movie's timeline is a little unclear because they have to just be very efficient because of their budget and their runtime, the resources they were working with. But I think we're led to believe that they'd been in a relationship for a while, because they're talking about love, they're talking about marriage, and it comes up that they haven't even kissed yet. And I didn't write down the line, but basically she talks about, like, she says something to the effect of like, I've lived in dread of this day. And it's a good man who cares about her with like a really great job and like prospect, like this good guy who's got everything together, who cares about her, saying, I love you and I'd like to build a life together. And her response is like, I've lived in dread of this.
It's interesting too, because you have to decipher kind of like 1942 movie into like, what are they saying? What are they actually talking about?
Sure.
Same. I had to kind of keep up with it. But I think that a lot of the like kissing is code for sex. Like when the psychiatrist is like, if a man were to kiss you, take you into his
embrace, to take you into his arms. Yeah.
Exactly. I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. The first time I was watching it, but then the second time it's like their honeymoon night, and she's like, I want to be everything that it means to be Mrs. Reed.
That was heartbreaking.
I can't.
She says, I did write that down. She says, I want to be Mrs. Reed, really. I want to be everything that name means to me, and I can't. Please be patient with me. Let me have time to get over the feeling that there's something evil inside. And I felt that so hard. Like, we talked about this a little bit previously before we recorded. Your main graphic memoir, Pure, like a lot of us are familiar with purity culture. We're kind of examining it more, the things it implicitly and explicitly taught and the negative effects it's had on men and women. But I mean, it's a very damaging thing. And I just couldn't help but think about that. Like, she was raised in the religious fundamentalist village, basically told, like, if you get in touch with this, like, this part of you, like, it's not out, like, you are made, we are made as full people. And if you engage this part of your full personhood, it's just bad. It's only bad. And like a lot of us were raised in the church, like, sex is bad until you get married, then it's great, which is like, how do you prepare somebody for a healthy sexual life with, don't think about it. We're not going to teach you anything about it. Feel shame if you have any interest in it. Okay, now you're married, and like, it's super important, by the way.
Right. And at no point in that timeline that you just described does the woman's sexuality and eroticism belong to her, right? She doesn't really even get the choice to invite her husband into this thing that is her, because it's his at that. It's this dynamic of ownership. And I think,
which does clock with the movie, with the panther in the cage, the kitten in the box, like Irina in her room on the wedding night, I think was very much mirroring the kitten in the box or the panther. And it's just like,
and she's internalizing it. She's the one who's like creating the cage, because Oliver responds to this like, oh, yeah, sweetie. Like, he's just like so understanding, to the point where like I was a little bit like confused about what she was saying, because he was like, at first I thought she was just like, be patient with me as I'm like kind of scared of this. But then when like she closes the door and he's like, good night, darling. And
that's their wedding night, and they're like, see ya.
Yeah. They're like in two separate rooms. She's like kind of feeling this tug about like, I want to go be with him, but I can't. I am petrified. I can't touch the handle of the door. And then like, you hear the cats in the zoo like kind of screaming. But it's this part of her that's in the cage. But going back to like the purity culture for a second, I think it's like, it's not just sex that's being controlled. I think it's the erotic part of the humanescent, right? Which I think of as something bigger than sex. And I think that like, if you're thinking about sexuality in a spiritual way too, this kind of clocks, right? That the erotic it's more about our vitality. Like, it's a life force. It's our creativity. It's our playfulness. It's a way that you kind of relate to life in a embodied, pleasurable, sensorial way. And being deeply in touch with that within you, with that kind of joy and delight and pleasure and embodiment. I feel like it's such a essential part of being human. And it's the thing, in my opinion, that makes sex good. It's what makes it not just like, the physical
a means to propagating the species.
Right.
Because
Exactly.
it could be very functional, but like God made it great and transcendent and all these things. It's not just like, I don't know, like exercising. Like it's a very different thing.
No. Yeah. And I mean, I think that women in particular have this enormous capacity for a type of erotic power that it's so massive. It's so big. Like another comic that I've made is something about, thinking about motherhood as kind of like a reflection of God.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm reflecting on the way that my body created life itself. Right. And, I'm using the, this is my body broken for you, take, eat. As I'm nursing my child, my body is sustaining life. And there's an erotic energy there between mother and child, not sexual, but like deeply embodied. And there's this like mutual pleasure and delight in the senses. I think this is something so much bigger than we think. I think that it's creativity itself, of life.
Yeah. And it's so we talked about fear, we talked about shame. Like, as a sidebar, you've spent a lot of time working and thinking, like, what are your insights on, like, why do people of faith sometimes have a hard time with sensuality? God made us as embodied, physical, like we're in a time, we're in a place, we're in a body. We have likes, we have dislikes. And if we believe that, like, man and woman, like, we're all made in God's image, like to delight in our essence and to delight in our being and our life and in the good things that we've been given, like, why is that so hard in your view? Like, do you have any idea? Like, what are some reasons that particularly people of faith have trouble delighting in the good gifts?
Yeah, I think, well, if you go all the way back to like our Old Testament texts, we have like entire sex poems about delighting in sexuality.
And they read them yearly in public for like everybody over the age of like 13 or whatever. Like, everybody every year, they read that out loud as a community. To like, that was community like training. That was community building.
Honestly, I think the reason is because historically, for the last 600-700 years, our faith has been kind of hijacked and held captive by a paradigm that is bigger than it, a man-made paradigm of basically patriarchy, domination, control, punishment. And it's through that lens that most of us have learned to think about what any part of spirituality means. That paradigm has been given permission to define what gospel means, what God, I truly believe that it's bigger than all of that, and that it's okay to look back at history and say, okay, wait, when did my religion turn into something that is used as a tool to reinforce pre-existing structures of kind of like hierarchy and control? And I think that, in purity culture, we kind of see it really overtly. There's just a lot of fear around our idea of sin is not nuanced in a lot of evangelical spaces, right? So I'm kind of trying to like marry in my mind the language of kind of psychology and the people living at this time, like Carl Jung, with the terminology that I grew up with.
Sure. And that is interesting. Like, in our whole process of trying to figure out God, ourselves, like loving our neighbor, all these things, like we have the tools that we were given. Like, that's our baseline, which is kind of the whole deconstruction thing. Like, people are going like, man, this is what I've been given. And like, I don't know, like, is this, I would like some better tools. That's just an interesting position to be in.
Yeah. And so I think maybe a lot of people will relate to this. This is kind of how I learned to deal with my own unwanted behavior, right? First and foremost, I have a problem with like the doctrine of depravity. Okay. In general, I'll just like put that out there. But you learn, okay, there are certain parts of your nature that are just bad and they need to go. they make you deserving of punishment and rejection. And the way that you deal with them is that you feel really, really bad about them. You apologize profusely. You accept substitutionary penal atonement, and you try not to do it anymore, right? And there's a lot of just kind of like judgment, like self-judgment and shame and fear in that, because if I touch that, if I get in touch with that, really, I mean, that's a debt. You can't. If it's sin, you can't really like listen to it, right?
Yeah, and it is
so
like how that kind of jives with like, and God made us in his image, and he saw everything as good, and like this was the peak of his creation. Like,
well, what I think instead, maybe if we could like tweak it slightly, because I think that this is maybe something that got warped, because if we can learn to meet ourselves with curiosity first, instead of immediately going to judgment, and kind of like a panicked fear, like, okay, no, I'm going to run from this. I'm going to apologize for this. If we can ask the question, where is this coming from? Why? You know, I usually think like with my child, I'm not like, okay, he's behaving this way because he's sinful. You know, I'm like, there is a reason why he's acting this way. And if I can get in touch with that reason, that's a way forward.
Being a parent has definitely caused me to reassess and just like, try to be curious and ask questions. Be like, like God's a good father. I'm trying to be a good father. Like what are we really saying about God? And what did God say about himself? And like, interesting.
If God is a good parent, and that's like the things that I think allowed me to start asking all these questions was just, okay, I'm going to believe one thing. God is an unconditionally loving parent. That's the one thing I'm going to believe. And if that's true, then all these other things started to change for me as I am a parent. I'm like, why am I treating myself with this kind of like terrorizing rigidity and judgment when that isn't how I look at my 4-year-old when he's behaving a certain way? I'm like, okay, I get curious about it. And in a deep way, I think that it's true of us too. You can listen to even the most terrifying parts of you, you can love your enemy, even if the enemy is inside. Mm-hmm. And there's where you see it transform. In the same way that, the gospel for me has switched from a punitive atonement story to a story of Jesus touching what everybody else was terrified to touch. And by sitting with this thing that was grotesque and terrifying and threatening and dangerous, and listening and touching that thing, like physically touching that person and seeing the humanity there, that feels like the gospel to me. And that feels like something that we can do with ourselves, because when we go to the part of us that we are most scared of and we go, I don't think you're bad, I want to listen to you. You know, if oh my God, I'm having lustful feelings for this person. I'm so sorry, God. Oh my, it's like, that's really, it sounds silly, but that's how it is. It's
I'm very familiar with that. Yeah. That cycle of normal behavior, maybe like going too far, shame, confusion, repentance, making all these deals, and then over and over and over. Like, very familiar with that.
And I feel like we can I feel like it makes it worse when we make it such a big deal. You can be like, I'm a human being who gets attracted to people or like whatever it might be.
Yeah. Well, and thinking again, like how, because it's different like with ourselves, right? And again, we're going to get back to cat people in a second because
yes, we are.
Arena didn't have this, but like
it relates, guys.
I want my boys to be respectful and appropriate and to make good choices, but also like I don't want them to live in fear of shame of being a person. I want them to be full people who are appropriate and making choices on purpose. I don't want them to live in distress and fear. Like literally, like when I watched the movie a couple of times as well. I watched it a while back and then I rewatched it and watched the commentary. Like when she is like almost crying saying this is her wedding night. And traditionally, that is when you consummate the marriage. And as they're walking up into their house, she's like, I feel like there's something evil inside me and I don't even want to touch you and get into that. Like, I don't want to tap into, like, I don't want to open the door to the sensual, erotic part of my being because, like, I was taught that it is destructive. And ironically, like, it is life-giving and generative and and good. Not that it can't be misused. Obviously, just like in every other part of our being, like nobody's saying sex and sexuality with no boundaries at all is good and healthy, but like sexuality is good and healthy.
Right, exactly. But like, I think that so many women raised in purity culture have felt the way that Irena felt on her wedding night, which is I have learned to be so scared of my sexuality and my lust and my body and my feelings. And I've learned that I am not trustworthy with my own body. I can't be trusted with my own body. I can't be trusted with my own sexuality, because if I embraced it, if I loved this part of me, I would be dishonorable. I would be, cast into sin. Maybe you wouldn't. Maybe this part of you is also like beautifully aware of the humanity of other people and wants to honor them too. But they've learned that they can't. They learn that they can't touch that. They can't touch that part of themselves. It needs to go off. And then on the wedding night, it needs to go on. Yeah. And it needs to, now we do need to be the little panther or whatever, right, for your husband. But again, like I very much believe that like this idea that it's like, okay, well now I'm your husband and now it's mine. You don't even get the opportunity to give it. Because you're always a separate person from your spouse, which to me, like, let me just like suggest like that's so much hotter. Like, it's just not like sexy to be married to like property, because it's so hard to desire something that you have to desire, that you
can't imagine. That's
that
very
you're supposed to want.
Motivating.
Right, exactly. But it's like, when you remember, oh, this is like a whole separate person that doesn't belong to me and that chooses me, that's kind of there. You have the opportunity to, kind of choose each other even within a committed relationship and feel desire, I think. And that's just like, it's really sad. I mean, purity culture, we've all experienced it to different degrees, but women, in a lot of cases, just hear like, you don't get a choice. Your pleasure is irrelevant, because sex, like everything else, exists solely for the purpose of honoring God. And in our view, what honoring God means is obedience and submission.
Serving. Yeah.
I understand that like in a lot of monogamous relationships, there is an understandable desire for like control and certainty, right? I think that that's like totally normal. And it's like, well, you need to promise me and we need to make this promise forever. And
like there's healthy mutuality, but it's not like
sure.
Yeah.
Because at the point at which like Irena is never going to have sex with Oliver, it's like, well, okay, now he's like not really, like he didn't sign up for a life of celibacy.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
So like in a healthy relationship, it would progress that like they do engage. But what does it mean? Yeah, exactly.
Right. So I feel like he gets to like choose that, like, okay, I want my life to be like with a partner that wants to be with me. I feel like he gets that right. It's like super healthy. It's like 1942.
And he says it directly. Like he's not. And that's okay. So.
He never forces her.
So yeah, he's a marine engineer. He works on drafting and constructing ships.
He's like an architect.
Yeah,
kind of.
He's got. Yeah. There are a couple of older guys. One of the guys who actually ended up some years later playing Alfred on the 1966 Adam West Batman show. He's one of the old guys there, but he's got a female coworker, Alice, who they're super friendly with, and they've got a really healthy relationship. And after an unclear amount of time in the movie where it's clear that Oliver and Irena are not going to have a sexual relationship. He's frustrated, and Alice goes, man, like, because they care about each other. They have a healthy relationship, seemingly with good boundaries. They're just close. And then eventually she's like, I have feelings for you, and like, I really hate to see you in this. But like, they don't kiss later on, like when they have coffee together, and he's like, hey, do you want me to walk home? She's like, no, I got it from here. And they shake hands. Like, I know it's the 40s, but it's very clear that like, she's like, hey, I'm interested in this, but I'm going to respect your whole deal, figure out your situation. Let me know. Like, it's all like, it's all handled like pretty darn well, like above board.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too, because they have like that conversation about like, what does it mean to be in love? Yeah. And then we get the juxtaposition of his relationship with Alice, which is very much like, it's like camaraderie and friendship and closeness. And you get the feeling
it's
that they
intimacy,
would just be like really committed. Yeah. But it's like, they're just like friends, like they're obviously attracted to each other, but it's that kind of a thing. And he's like, well, when I'm with Irena, I have to be in the room with her. Right. So like his attraction to Irena feels more of like a like primal, or
he
like
desires her. Well, and it's probably building up too over the time of like, if you marry someone and they're like, be patient, and you're like, okay. And then it just goes on, and it's like, you guys aren't even kissing. You just go like, you have the frustration of like, I want this, but then also like, what is this even? Like at a certain point.
I feel like we should also say that before Oliver and Alice even have this conversation, Oliver has a realization like, okay, Irena, this is like a serious like problem for you. I'm going to like get you the best psychiatrist that I possibly can.
Well, that's right after she confesses to feeding the dead bird to the panther at the zoo. He goes, hey, okay, this has kind of gotten far. We really need some intervention for you. For you.
Oh, that was a beautiful scene. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about that. So she's like, he tries to get her this little pussy cat, this little tame, sweet cat.
Who loves everybody at his office. Everybody in the office pets him. They all love her.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's like.
And then when he gives it to Irena, it freaks out.
Yeah. Yeah. And she's like, I don't like it. So they like exchange it for a canary or something. Yeah. And we get this scene of like all these animals in cages that are just like, let me out. Like, it's powerful.
Yeah. Irena walks into the pet shop. It's filled with hundreds of all sorts of pets. And they all just, it's like a jungle. They all just go nuts.
Yeah. Animals in captivity, a big recurring visual.
It's true.
But she's like alone in the house, and she goes to try to like gently like pet the little canary that they have in a cage, and it like dies of fright, I guess. Yeah. Like it immediately dies. So it's again this like idea that like I am dangerous. But she then like takes the little dead bird and kind of like compulsory, like she's, I don't know if I should do this, but she walks back to the Central Park Zoo and feeds it to the leopard. And to me, it's just like, again, this thing inside of me, the leopard is like her eroticism, her power, her rage, all of these parts of her essence is starving, right? She's surviving on like feeding it little scraps.
She's fixated and fascinated, but also afraid. Like it is a really interesting kind of juxtaposition.
So then she goes to this psychiatrist, which, I mean, the reason that I feel like the film is kind of like unfriendly towards psychiatry is it's doing a little bit of that, like, look at the hubris of science. Because the guy's like, oh, I can explain away your paranoia because your thing is, it's primitive, it's uncivilized, it's silly.
Well, but he does also tie it back to the childhood trauma. He's like, your dad left and everybody said your mom was a cat person. Like, you've been a traumatized person. And
I think he's like right, but I think the movie, because like he's wrong in the movie because she's like, this is all literally true in the movie. And so he is like, oh, well, this is easy for me to explain. You're silly. Here's my little diagnosis. And he doesn't believe her.
Well, he doesn't really give her, I mean, I've never seen a psychiatrist, but he doesn't give her like exercises or tools to like work through it or help herself.
He literally tells her in the next scene, he's like,
think differently. And she's like, I'd really love to, guy.
Normal.
He's like, guy, I would. So that's a thing that I read a number of people. I believe actually I didn't do a ton of research. I believe that the primary screenwriter who worked with the director on and the producer on developing the script, I believe he was a closeted gay man, and there's a number of queer kind of coded things in there, and a lot of the normal abnormal stuff. A lot of folks now kind of read as not that Irina, like this equals Irina being a lesbian, but like these themes of like fear and not fitting in and being normal, like that could potentially be there. But I'm viewing it. I mean, I think that's a perfectly fine reading. Fair reading
100%.
And then we are in real time kind of dealing with, well, like I have all these things that I want to do, but like we also know, like just because we have an impulse doesn't mean that we should act on it, because not all impulses are good, but figuring out like as we develop, hopefully in a healthy environment, or now our generation, like trying to create that healthy environment for our kids, like that is making me both reassess and like just try to slow down, because it's easy for me to be like efficient where it's like, my boys are incredible. They're actually, honestly, most of the time super well behaved, but it's like, there's sometimes like, just do what I say, man. Like, just do it, please. Like, I don't care if you want to and all these things. But then it's like, no, I love these boys. These boys are like part of me, but they're also different. And I want to not give them no boundaries, but I want to honor them and love them and respect them and make them feel that I am a safe person to be their true selves around. Again, not no boundaries, anything goes, like be insane, but like I want to be a safe person. And that's given me a lot to think about and a lot of apologizing.
Yeah, totally. I mean, being a parent is so hard. But like, I think that people go towards like, they're like, well, if you're not using punishment and intimidation, then there must be no boundaries. And it's so sad that we don't have a concept of how we could like hold boundaries with a child. Like if my kid is like very, very sad and very disappointed that I'm not going to buy him the Transformer in Target, I'm not going to threaten that I'm going to spank him when he gets home. I'm not going to yell at him. I'm not going to use my innate power over him to terrorize him. I'm just going to say, you are allowed to be so sad about this because I know how much the Transformer means to you. And I'm not scared by your tears. You can cry with me. I'm not going to get him the Transformer. I'm going to get him home safely. Right. But that's kind of how I've come to think about the gospel for me, too, is we have gotten such, even when we think it's not legalistic, right? We have gotten such a rules-based, right and wrong-based version of what Christianity means. And to me, it's like Christianity is Jesus saying, I will be with you in the messiest mess. I will be with you at your worst. I will be with the person who's caught in sexual sin and according to the law should be put to death. And I'm not going to even, I'm going to just sit with her. I'm going to be with these people. And I think that it's the most profound thing. And it's what we've lost access to. And I think that we've gone back to eye for an eye, right? As kind of like the basis of what we think the gospel means. Even though Jesus said, yeah, it was written eye for an eye. I say move beyond that. I say we don't do that anymore. I say we turn the other cheek. We're doing things differently now. So I think that like Christians should feel tremendous permission to question a lot of what people have historically told them that this means. I think that you should feel empowered to trust in what it would mean if Jesus was serious about this much compassion, being the definition of God. What I would say is just like, you're allowed to think critically and deeply about these things, from the inside, from the outside. You're allowed to take your time. You're allowed to be uncertain and curious.
No, that is, and I try not to be, like, depending on how intense people are, I just go, look, like, not that this is the answer for everything, but I'm like, well, the people are like, you have to think and do right if that's like their main marker of a faithful person. It's like, well, I really don't know what you do with the thief on the cross. And I'm not saying like that's all of our, like, that's the blueprint of what we should aim for. But he's like, you'll be with me today. Like, he didn't know anything. He certainly didn't live a righteous life, but there was compassion. So I feel like we should probably chill out on a lot of things and like, chill out doesn't mean, like, it's just like a false narrative that hyper fundamentalists and people who seek control are saying that like grace and compassion means anarchy. No, it means grace and compassion.
I mean, I like Matthew 25 when Jesus has his parable about the sheep and the goats, and half of the people are like, hey, wait a minute, we were really faithful in the church.
That's terrifying.
And he says, really? Because I don't recognize you. And the other people said, well, I was never affiliated, but I'm sorry, I wasn't attending this. I didn't have the right theology. And he said, oh no, I was there. You were loving me. Yeah. Oh, it gets me emotional, that one. It's just like, you are my family. And it's not because you had the right theology and you said the right things and you were certain enough. It's because you loved people. And that's what still, it just penetrates me, the seeing the humanity in others and choosing to maintain like deep empathy for people, even if you disagree with them, like even if you think that they're wrong. I think that is central to the Jesus message. There's no way around that.
Okay, back to Kat. We will go to the end. So the first, just filmmaking wise, artistry, incredible scene, the stalking at the pool. That's the big scene everybody loves. I was so glad I finally got to see it. That's like the big set piece scene where you don't see the panther at all in that scene. It's just vibes, but it's top-notch vibes. What did you think of that as an artist?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's the way that like Jaws is scariest in the parts where you can't see the shark, right? Mm-hmm. So you still have this kind of like doubt and question in your mind. Like, okay, is this in her head? Is this really like, did the cat get out of the zoo? Is it Irena that transformed into this panther? But yeah. Okay. So it's Alice, who's like the new love interest.
Yes. The other woman, Oliver's friend at work. And this is after she's aware, I believe. Or is that?
They went to the museum and she can pick up, okay, they have a connection, I don't.
Because they go to the museum and they're in the boat section, I guess, of the museum. And literally, like, they kick her out of the group. Sucks. They're like, you don't know about boats. You should go to the modern art area. We're going to hang out over here because we know boats. Isn't this a cool boat? She's just sitting there like, I would like to be here with you guys. And they're like, you get out of here. We're boat people.
They're on the top level with the architecture, and she descends a staircase and is standing by a statue of Anubis. So, like, again, we get this, like, repeated thing where, like, she represents kind of more archaic, primitive human stuff, like the more animalistic instinct side of things. And, modernity can't kind of comprehend her. So anyway, she's like, Alice is going to like, I don't know, like a swimming pool.
I think that's like in her building, like her pool.
Oh, and they're like extravagant New York brown house.
Yeah.
Brownstones. but like it's night and she's alone and she starts hearing like the panther like prowling around. And she's like screaming kind of in the pool. She's kind of like trapped in the center. And then we, the ladies who work there kind of go downstairs. They turn on the lights. They're like, what's the matter? And then we just see Irena.
Yeah, Irena just pops up going, hey, is everything okay?
In like a giant, fabulous fur coat. Like very...
Fashion in the movie is very on point. Yeah. 40's impressive. Plenty of budget, I'm sure, went to the wardrobe.
Yeah. Yeah. And she's just kind of like very cat, like tilting her head, kind of toying with her like a cat, like, oh, like, what's the matter? And then, she's like, oh, I'm scared. Like, I'm kind of
that was much more malicious. Like previously, there's kind of like jealousy and impulsiveness. Like that was definitely a choice of Irena to mess with her on that one. That was willful.
Yeah. But she doesn't hurt her, and I think that's interesting too, is that like there's something justified, I think, in like, okay, this woman is like moving in on my literal husband. I'm gonna like, the cat's gonna come out a little bit, but
jealousy is not unfounded.
No. And again, it's one of those like forbidden emotions, but it's a human emotion.
Sure. Especially in like, I mean, God is like, there can be good, healthy jealousy.
Oh, totally. Jealousy means you love somebody. I think Esther Perel says that. You quote the Bible, I'll quote Esther Perel.
Yeah, hey, no, I mean,
it's human truth. So, okay, what happens after that? She comes out and she finds that her robe has been like ripped to shreds.
Yeah. So she goes back. We're skipping some stuff. So after the pool, there is...
I think she goes to the psychiatrist, right? Yes. And she's like, I believe that this is true.
And the psychiatrist and that's where it gets to like psychiatrist. He turns bad and he's kind of pushing her and kind of getting creepy, going like, maybe we need to like it's kind of under the auspices of, well, maybe we need like the hypnosis wasn't working. The me telling you to think differently wasn't working. So what if I kissed you? Then, like, could I prove to you that this is nothing if I kissed you? And she's like, I don't think I'd like that.
Yeah. And then he does anyway.
That's in a different scene at the end, but I think we should go there because that's what I didn't put that together in my first view because I was just kind of locked in. But she doesn't engage sexually with Oliver, which is what she fears will trigger the cat. She does turn into the cat to kind of tease Alice a little bit, but she doesn't fully like give in to her destructive tendencies. The thing that really gets it is when she is taken advantage of by a person in power, which is kind of interesting that I didn't really like. So he does eventually kiss her at the end. Yeah. And that's kind of like when all of the pieces are like the dominoes are falling kind of fast. Like Alice and Oliver together, they've decided like, okay, actually, no. They're not like, let's run off because the three of them, Oliver, Alice, and the doctor talk together. And he's like, well, the doctor says, I think we have like two options. You give her a divorce or we commit her. Because you can't divorce an insane person. And Oliver takes the high road. She's like, no, like she's really ill. Like I'm not just gonna divorce her and like leave her high and dry when she's rough. Like let's commit her and work through this. And Alice is like, yeah, cool. Like I'll support you while we figure this out. And like they all handle things very good choices. But then the psychiatrist in a later scene pushes it because I think he is kind of the non-believer. He's like, this is crazy. This is fairy tales. This is foolish children's stories. He kisses her and it does activate her. And it's not that she found it so erotic. I think that was just like,
not
at all.
Her eyes chilling. It's chilling.
But then,
and so, it's okay. So like, I think, like I said before, I think that we can say like, take in your arms and embrace and kiss is 1942 movie code for sex in this movie. So it's, to me, I read it very clearly as like, this is a sexual assault. Like he is taking advantage of her. He said, what if I were to, make a move on you. And she said, I don't want you to. And he immediately does
violates
it anyway.
that, yeah.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of like gross. He has like this open mouth and her mouth like stays closed and she's expressionless.
It's very uncomfortable.
Very right. And then like we see kind of like this gleam in her eyes, and then like everything goes kind of dark. And so again, the time that this kind of wild creature actually does come out and
is to defend her own.
Somebody is to defend herself. It's not to just be like needlessly destructive. Yeah.
It's sad. Like, what would have happened if she would have tried to actually be with Oliver? Who knows? Who's to say?
I mean, I think it would have been amazing. Okay, so the quote at the very, very like beginning that they kind of like put on the screen. Do you remember that?
Yes.
I like looked it up because I was like, who the heck is
the
that?
doctor in the movie.
It's the character. And like, so he wrote a pretend book that the quote is from. He said, or the quote says, even as the fog continues to lie in the valleys, so does ancient sin cling to the low places, the depressions in the world consciousness. And it's from, I don't know, a paper or book, The Anatomy of Atavism by Dr. Louis Judd, who's the psychiatrist that we were just talking about that gets killed by the Panther. But like, it's interesting that they're like, okay, he's like writing papers on atavism, which is like the primal, the barbaric, the savage, uncivilized. And I mean, I think the fact that he dies at the hands of the Panther is another, like, he underestimated the power of nature, right? Which like can't be controlled.
Yeah.
It's almost like I feel like that's also a really big like theme in horror movies. Mm-hmm. That's like the whole Jurassic Park thing. Like, you can't control Mother Nature. Sure. It's in like everything. Like, if you think that you're better than it, smarter than it, or can control it. Like,
the Don quote at the end, though, that's a real one. I appreciated that as well, because the kind of tragedy of it. So the psychiatrist kisses her, she attacks him, and then the St. John and the sketch foreshadowing happens where he pulls a sword out of his cane and stabs her as she attacks him, and then she becomes the Panther, impaled, and runs away and dies at the zoo, basically.
Yeah.
And
wait, did she die like after letting the...
Yeah, she let the Panther out and then basically ran into traffic.
Yeah, that... Wait, she dies of the wound.
More or less, yeah.
Because the
actual Panther died in traffic. He died. She died in front of the.
He dies immediately.
Yeah,
like it gets hit by like a
very theatrical
taxi going 1 mile an hour. Yeah, and
then the quote. So she and the Panther that she's been obsessed with the whole time, both die. It's pretty. It's pretty quick, and then the right before the end, it's the John Donne quote. But black sin hath betrayed to endless night my world, both parts, and both parts must die. Theme score, and it's like, oh boy, this is rough. But like, it was kind of just supposed to be like an exploitation fun. Like, so originally this wasn't adapted from anything. They're just like, we want you to make a movie called Cat People. Come up with something. Like, that was kind of just his assignment. So
I love it.
That's how they came up with it. So it was just supposed to be kind of a down and dirty, cheap exploitation horror movie, and they ended up making this super profound, almost 100 years later, very enduring classic.
Sometimes like the best pieces of art they're picking up on something like in the psyche of the consciousness of the culture that like they can't even fully articulate it, right? Because I didn't feel like the movie was like preaching any particular message, but it was like hitting on something without even fully realizing it. Okay, so I kept thinking about, this is a quote from like a Jungian analyst, Joseph Lee. He's like still working, but I kept thinking about it. It said, shadow is a veil behind which resides a darkly splendid world of unrestrained instinct, fantasy, and drive. Like Dionysus, yielding to it might create a kind of ecstasy of relief and or a dismemberment of who we thought we should be. Most importantly, shadow is full of life, raw life that fuels individuation if held in the right way. And the path that leads in the right direction is paved with a kind of inexhaustible curiosity. Whew. So it's like there is this potential for destruction, for ecstasy, for relief, for dismemberment. But there is so much rich, raw life in the shadow, in this part of us. And the options are, it must die, or we can like gather the bravery to be inexhaustibly curious about the depths, even the darkest depths of our humanity, and perhaps even integrate them in a way that's healthy. So they're no longer exiled to a shadowy place where they're going to be frustrated and caged and constantly clawing at us in our soul, desperate for our attention. But like we could make peace with the glorious part of us that feels rage and realize that it's not actually maybe as monstrous or evil as we fear it is.
Absolutely. The one segment we do have, Stephanie, is Substance Shoutouts. What have you been reading, watching, listening to? Is there, and you can do a number of them if you like, can be movies, IG art accounts, comics, music. What have you been taking in besides Cat People lately and enjoying that has been, bringing you joy, making you think, challenging you?
Oh man. Okay. Let me think for a second. Okay. I already mentioned Mad Men in this.
All right.
Me and my husband rewatch that all the time because I feel like it rules. It's one of those things that like we never don't go, okay, pause it and like start talking about the human condition. It's just so good. Like I always want to talk to other people about it.
One of the very best. It's been way too long. One of my friends on one of the Discords I'm in is doing, I think, her first watch of it. And she's kind of like updating us as she's give that.
It's about everything.
It is.
It's about everything, and it's gorgeous. And I don't know. If I ever made a podcast, it would just be like Mad Men.
And because it's about everything, like a lot of the moments that hit you the hardest are the little ones. Like I remember, like I'm a big crier in film and I mean, I guess television now has gotten big, but like
that's beautiful.
I've always been like very like easily affected. But I mean, I remember a bunch of the stuff that really got to me in Mad Men was just like the random little stuff. Like obviously the big moments that are engineered like hit, but just like all the time. Like that's an all.
The attention to detail is insane. Like it's so good. And I just like how there aren't really any like heroes or villains in it. There's just like really complex people.
That's
like,
true.
Cool to see.
Maybe Pete though. He kind of sucks.
Oh yeah, Pete Campbell, but yeah,
but also a damaged person.
Crying, yeah. When he's like, "I have nothing," I was like, "Oh, why do I feel bad for you? I hate you usually." My other favorite show right now, pretty much on par, is Bluey.
Yes. I'm trying to get some of the people involved on the podcast.
Okay. So like I said, I have a 4-year-old. So we have watched like every episode of Bluey, and it's so hard to explain to like non-parents how gorgeous and piercing
nothing like it
little cartoon is.
It's incredible.
It's unreal. It's like you end up just like, you're like, you know, kind of like, oh, I'm watching this. Oh, I'm kind of laughing at this. This is kind of funny. And by the end, you're like, I am in tears at the end of every episode. Often. And it's just like, how did you do that in like 8 minutes or whatever the episode is?
Like every episode's like 7 to 9 minutes and they're all banger.
They're all. So I was making a joke to my husband. I was like, my TV crush used to be Don Draper and now it's Bandit.
There you go. So your shout outs are your 2 TV crushes there. I like it.
Yes. So that's what's on in our house during the day usually with Tommy. And what have I been reading? Okay, well, I reread Alison Bechdel's Fun Home and Are You My Mother, which are 2 of my favorite graphic memoirs. Have you read either of
Fun
those?
Home?
Fun Home. It's like a short for funeral home. Which
Okay.
Yeah.
And no, I have not.
Have you heard of the Bechdel test?
Yes.
Okay, so that's like taken from her name. Alison Bechdel is like a cartoonist and a writer.
I did not know she was a cartoonist who coined that.
She's brilliant. Yeah. So those are like two kind of like of her memoirs, and they're they kind of go together as a pair. Fun Home is about her relationship to her late father, and she's kind of like retroactively going back and examining her relationship to him, and like she did not know about him, like he was potentially, I think he was like a closeted queer person, and she's like finding these things out about him after his death. And then Are You My Mother is about her relationship to her mother, and she takes that more through like a psychological developmental lens, but they're both just like really good.
We don't have enough people shouting out comic on this. I like it.
I'm here for that.
All right, Stephanie, where obviously you are writing, drawing, Pure, your long form project on your website, publishing a lot of the stuff on Instagram. Where can people find you? Where would you like us to direct folks?
Oh yeah. So if you want to read the whole Pure comic so far in order, it's probably less confusing. It's easiest to just go to stephaniestalvey.com. And my Instagram is like where I hang out, stephanie.stalvey.artist. And I pretty regularly post on there. And then I also have a Patreon where if you want to get like exclusive comics and stuff that they won't let me post on Instagram. You can
the spicy stuff?
The spices. Yeah. You can pay $4 for that. It's cool because, I mean, the conversations we're having on Patreon too are just like...
Patreon is a bit of a community. I have a couple of shows, and I guess that you do have... I imagine with work like yours, there might be more of an actual conversation in the comments.
Oh yeah, they're brilliant. They're so thoughtful, and like, yeah, we're joking. There's more spicy stuff, but it's really more like, okay, let's try to like take back like the purity and the beauty of a lot of things that got only offered to us in this kind of explicit or secretive or kind of grotesque lens. Like, how can we frame this in a way that is beautiful, since it's so rarely framed that way? Like, what is it? What does healthy sex look like? You know, stuff like that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I will put those in the show notes there. Stephanie, it was really nice to talk to you, and I'm glad that introduced you to a new favorite.
So great. Like, you're so wonderful. Thank you for talking with me for all this time.
Next time we're in Florida, hit you guys up.
Absolutely, please. Yeah, come to Disney World as an excuse. And oh my goodness, my friend, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a wonderful spooky season, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the Curse of the Cat People.
Okay, yes, let's do it. Let's keep in touch.
There it is, Stephanie Stalvey. Thank you so much for joining the Substance Pod. And I'll tell you what, I've got to learn to trust Phil with these movie recommendations, because even when I edited the Josh Larson conversation and they talked about cat people, I was like, with a name like that, 1942, there's no way this movie is good. But it's only 70 minutes long, like they mentioned, and it is really good. I watched it after, kind of while editing this episode, and it is so good. But who would have thought that a movie called Cat People from 1942 could have brought about such deep conversations about religious fundamentalism, purity culture. Such a great conversation. So as always, please feel free to share this with anyone who you think might be interested, whether they are kind of working through their own struggles coming out of purity culture, or they're just into spooky movies and it is spooky season. So share this one with them so that they can enjoy the movie and this conversation. You'll be able to follow along with Stephanie's work at the links in the show notes, and you can follow us at The Substance Pod on social media. And as you hopefully know, we recently launched a Patreon, patreon.com/thesubstancepod, where you can support us financially. There's a few different tiers starting as low as $3 per month, where you will get the perk of helping us choose what movies and books we'll talk about here on the main feed, but you also get some bonus content. Some of that is already up. I had a conversation with Andrew Whitehead about his book, American Idolatry. So you can go and listen to that conversation in full over on our Patreon page. And I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but there are, especially for you movie lovers, there's a few things coming. I think we're going to have a special just for the patrons. There will be maybe a bonus Substantive Cinema coming out to the main feed, but then some extra bonus content just for the patrons when it comes to spooky season and a particular film franchise that Phil is a fan of. So you don't want to miss any of that. We've got plenty of things coming. We're going to make this worth it for the patrons. So again, for as little as $3 a month, you can support this show. You can help me to keep being able to edit it, help Phil to continue to get great guests and to record these substantive conversations. So if this work has been a benefit to you, then please share it widely wherever you would like, but also consider supporting us over at patreon.com/thesubstancepod. We'll see you in 2 weeks on the next episode of The Substance.
But there was just no fat on this movie.
He's like, I'll give you all the patience and understanding in my heart.
You want to come in for tea? You're my first friend that I've made. And I'm like, we do have one segment here. And before I get to that, are you aware that 2 years later in 1944, there was The Curse of the Cat People?
I was not aware.
So
there is a sequel?
Oliver, Alice, and in a form, Irena are back. I haven't watched it yet.
What?
I'm very excited. I've got it from the library. I think my wife and I are going to be watching it soon. The description of this is Amy, the young and friendless daughter of Oliver and Alice, befriends her father's late wife and an aging reclusive actress. So I don't know if this is like a children's fantasy and trying to deal with some. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but it's the three principals are back 2 years later. Same producers, same studio.
I'm excited.
A true sequel. I'm very excited. So it's either that's either a rental or a library that's not streaming.
Okay.
But a number of my friends on Letterboxd. Are you familiar with Letterboxd? It's like Goodreads for movies, but better.
Oh, cool.
It's an incredible site. I love it a lot. We've had a couple of their employees on to do Substantive Cinemas previously.
Nice.
A number of my friends have given this 4 and 5 star. Excited for it.
What? Okay, I'm so excited too.
So that was just a little nugget there before, because I thought I'm so pumped for this. I think the angle, it sounds like, and I'm trying not to read too much about it, is like their Alice and Oliver's eventual child, like her dealing with all the trauma and fallout of like the events of Cat People, like the generational issues that stem from these things.
Oh, gorgeous. I'm so excited.
Because Oliver was married to Irena, so it's like, Dad, like, tell me about your life kind of thing. It's kind of the vibes I'm getting. I'm excited.
Well, the Serbian myths are all true, son.